What happens when the search for a new love turns into a trap? In the quiet coastal town of Montero, Carlos, a wealthy widower and owner of a luxurious resort, faces the void left by the unexpected death of his wife, Laura. The pain is intense, and he feels lost amidst memories that seem endless. His teenage son, Marcos, also feels the absence of his mother, struggling to understand what it means to live without her. Together, they try to navigate this sea of sadness, but life presents them with a new challenge that could be the key to recovery or a path to disillusionment. Carlos, engulfed in his own pain, sees the arrival of Helena, his son's teacher, as a sign of hope. She brings with her a light that makes him feel alive again, and slowly, a bond begins to form between them. However, happiness is short-lived, as Marcos, observant and concerned, starts to notice something strange. He realizes that the relationship between Helena and Richard, the brother who comes to help Carlos with financial problems, is more complex than it seems. The suspicious interactions among the three become a burden for Marcos, who tries to alert his father to his concerns. Meanwhile, Carlos, already emotionally involved with Helena, ignores his son's warnings. Tension rises as the wedding day approaches. Carlos believes he has finally found a new love, but Marcos knows something is wrong and feels he needs to act. On the day of the ceremony, when everything seems perfect, he interrupts the wedding, revealing the devastating truth. Helena and Richard had been planning to deceive Carlos. The revelation is a shock to everyone, and Carlos realizes that the trust he placed in Helena was misplaced. Devastated, he also feels grateful to his son for having the courage to expose the plot before it was too late. In the days that follow, Carlos dedicates himself to rebuilding his life and strengthening his relationship with Marcos. He reflects on his choices and what is truly important. 2 years later, in an unexpected moment, Carlos meets Mariana, a businesswoman who not only becomes his business partner but also his new chance at love. With Marcos's support, Carlos finally finds a new path to happiness and discovers that love can be reborn even after the deepest pain. Together, they begin a new chapter, proving that it is possible to overcome adversity and rewrite one's own story. Carlos was in a dark place, a maze of emotions that seemed to have no exit. After Helena's betrayal, the weight of disillusionment followed him like a shadow. He felt like a divided man. On one side, the father who wanted to be strong for his son, and on the other, the widower still carrying the pain of losing Laura. The nights were long and lonely, and the days were a monotonous repetition of tasks that brought no joy. He wondered if he could find the strength to start over. Marcos, in turn, felt the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. The act of interrupting the wedding had been a difficult decision, but he knew he needed to protect his father, even if it meant displeasing Carlos. The teenager carried an immense emotional burden, struggling to understand his role in this new dynamic. He wanted to see his father happy, but the distrust towards people like Helena and Richard kept him on constant alert. His friendships with classmates began to suffer, as he couldn't open up about his concerns, fearing they wouldn't understand what was happening at home. As Carlos tried to get back on his feet, Richard, the brother who had come to help, became an even more complicated element in his life. Richard was a charismatic figure, always surrounded by friends and admirers, but Carlos began to notice small behaviors that bothered him. The brother seemed increasingly interested in taking control of the resort, suggesting changes Carlos wasn't ready to make. Conversations about finances became tense, and Carlos wondered if Richard was really there to help him or if he had his own interests in mind. This doubt only heightened Carlos's anxiety, who was already dealing with so many other issues. On one of those difficult days, Carlos decided he needed some time for himself. He went to the deserted beach, a place he used to frequent with Lara. The sound of the waves crashing on the sand and the cool breeze brought him slight relief, but the solitude was palpable. He sat on the sand, his thoughts a jumble in his mind, and wondered if he would ever be able to love again. The pain of betrayal still stung, and he questioned whether he could trust another person. This moment of reflection turned into a dilemma. Should he open his heart again or protect himself from another possible disappointment? Meanwhile, the relationship between father and son was also being tested. Marcos, noticing his father's emotional state, decided it was time to act. He knew Carlos needed support, but he didn't know how to offer it without seeming intrusive. The teenager began to get closer to Mariana, a woman who worked at a local cafe and always had a warm smile. She became a friend to Marcos, who, in informal conversations, began to realize that Mariana had her own emotional baggage. Her past had taught her to value the small things in life, and she was willing to help Carlos find a new path. Marcos felt that Mariana could be the key to healing his father's wounds, but at the same time, he feared that Carlos might not be ready for it. Their friendship began to strengthen, and Marcos found himself in a delicate position. Should he encourage his father to open up to Mariana or protect what little remained of his father's wounded heart? Conversations between them became more frequent, and Mariana showed genuine interest in Carlos's story. She didn't see him merely as a wealthy man but as someone who had suffered and was seeking redemption. Carlos, for his part, began to feel a slight attraction to Mariana but hesitated to allow it. He remembered the promises he had made to Lara and feared repeating past mistakes. The memories of his wife were intense, and the idea of loving again felt like a betrayal. Mariana's presence in his life was a balm, but he didn't know if he was ready to open the doors of his heart to someone new. As the days passed, life in Montero continued, along with the challenges that tested Carlos at every turn. The internal struggle between the desire to rise again and the fear of getting hurt once more grew increasingly intense. He found himself at a crucial point. He needed to choose between allowing love back into his life or remaining trapped in a cycle of pain and distrust. This choice would become the landmark of his journey of overcoming, where each step would be filled with lessons and decisions that would shape his future. Carlos sat on the sand, his heart heavy like a burden. The waves broke gently, but he couldn't relax. Helena's betrayal still hurt him, and the weight of the responsibility of being a father, a widower, and a businessman left him exhausted. He looked at the horizon, where the sky met the sea, and thought about how time seemed to have stopped since Lara's death. Pain and disillusionment had become part of his routine, and he wondered if he would ever be able to break free from this emotional prison. Meanwhile, Marcos tried to find a way to help his father. Conversations with Mariana were becoming more frequent. Her energy was contagious, and the way she listened to Carlos seemed to bring a glimmer of hope. However, the teenager was torn. He wanted his father to be happy, but at the same time, he feared that Mariana might not be the right person. The fear of seeing Carlos get hurt again kept him on alert. Conversations between father and son became more tense as Marcos tried to express his desire for Carlos to open his heart while Carlos closed himself off even more. Richard, the brother who had come to help, was becoming an increasingly unsettling presence. He would show up with ideas for the resort that made Carlos uncomfortable. Suggestions for restructuring and expanding seemed more like a way for Richard to take over what Carlos had built. Discussions about the future of the resort became frequent and increasingly bitter. Carlos felt cornered, as if he were fighting against an invisible adversary. The pressure to make decisions that would affect his future and his son's future became unbearable. Distrust towards his brother grew, but Carlos felt powerless to confront him, fearing that it might worsen the situation. The emotional tension accumulated, and nights became a silent battlefield. Carlos tossed and turned in bed, unable to find rest. Nightmares haunted him, filled with images of Lara and Helena's betrayal, mixed with the presence of a brother who felt more like a rival. He wondered if he would ever be able to break free from this cycle of pain. The anguish manifested physically. His health began to deteriorate, and he frequently felt tired and drained of energy. The lack of sleep and constant stress were affecting his work, and he realized he was beginning to withdraw from those around him. Marcos, in turn, noticed that his father was changing. He was no longer the strong and determined man he used to be. Now, Carlos seemed lost, and this left the teenager worried. To try to ease the pressure, Marcos began to spend more time with Mariana. Conversations with her became a safe harbor, and he started to share his concerns about his father and the situation at home. Mariana, always understanding, offered advice and support but also made it clear that Carlos needed to face his demons. She believed that healing would only come if he allowed himself to feel the pain and didn't try to avoid suffering. Meanwhile, the relationship between Carlos and Richard was becoming increasingly tense. In a meeting where Richard presented his ideas for the resort, Carlos couldn't contain his frustration. He abruptly stood up, interrupting his brother and expressing his distrust regarding Richard's intentions. Carlos's words came out like an explosion, and Richard, surprised, tried to defend himself, but the conversation quickly turned into a confrontation. Voices were raised, and in a moment of anger, Carlos made it clear that he would not let anyone make decisions for him. This fight left Carlos even more shaken, and he felt alone, as if he were fighting against everyone. With the tension rising, Carlos decided that he needed a change. He began to distance himself from Richard and sought a healthier space to work on his emotions. He started spending more time at the beach, where he could reflect and let his anguish flow with the waves. During those moments of solitude, he wondered if he was willing to let Mariana into his life. The idea of loving again terrified him, but at the same time, there was something about Mariana that attracted him. It was as if she were a ray of light in the midst of darkness. Days became a constant struggle between the desire to start anew and the fear of getting hurt. Carlos felt that he needed to open himself up to new possibilities, but the pain of the past still held him back. He knew that to heal, he would have to confront his fears, but the thought of taking that step felt like an insurmountable mountain. Each day became a test, and the question that haunted him was whether he would find the courage to start over or remain trapped in his own web of disillusionment. The choice between opening his heart again or protecting himself from pain became increasingly urgent, and Carlos knew time was running out. Carlos was on one of his daily walks on the beach, the sound of the waves crashing in the background and the sea breeze enveloping him like a hug. He was lost in his thoughts, reflecting on how life seemed like a labyrinth with no exit. The weight of responsibilities and betrayals from the past left him in a state of constant discouragement. However, that day, something unexpected happened. As he walked, Carlos spotted a group of children playing in the sand. They were laughing and running, completely oblivious to the worries of the world. One boy, bolder than the others, decided to build a sandcastle. He called for help from his friends, who quickly rallied to assist him. Carlos stopped to watch the scene, and for a moment he felt a glimmer of hope. The children were creating something beautiful and fun, without fear of what might happen, just living in the moment. Suddenly, the boy leading the sandcastle construction turned and, without warning, ran toward Carlos. With a radiant smile, he grabbed the man's hand and said, "Come on, help us build." It's going to be fun." Carlos hesitated, but the sincerity in the child's eyes made him relent. He crouched down and began to help, shaping the sand and laughing with the children. In those brief moments, he forgot the worries and pain that tormented him. The simple joy of playing and creating something together made his heart beat in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. However, when the castle was almost complete, a wave larger than the others approached, swallowing the castle and leaving a trail of destruction in the sand. Carlos, who had been so immersed in the moment, couldn't avoid the frustration that welled up in his chest. The children, however, were undeterred. Instead of crying over the loss, they began to laugh and play again, daring the next wave to come. "Let's build another one, even better," shouted the boy as everyone joined in again, full of energy and determination. The scene had a profound impact on Carlos. He realized that, just like the sandcastle, his life had also been destroyed by circumstances beyond his control. He had allowed himself to be consumed by pain and distrust, forgetting that there was still room for joy and creation in his life. The children taught him an important lesson. Even when everything seems lost, it is possible to start over and try again. The boy's smile and the resilience of the group touched his heart in a way he hadn't expected. After that day, Carlos decided that he needed to confront his fears and open himself up to new possibilities. He began to meet with Mariana more frequently, not just to vent but also to explore the possibility of a new beginning. The conversations that had once been laden with hesitation now flowed more easily. He started to share his insecurities, and Mariana, with her wisdom, encouraged him to view his pain as part of the healing process, not as a prison. The relationship with Richard, on the other hand, was still a battleground. Carlos realized he needed to set boundaries. In a candid conversation, he told his brother that he was willing to hear his ideas, but he could not allow Richard to dictate the direction of the resort or his life. This new stance brought an unexpected relief. Carlos felt stronger, as if he were finally regaining the control he felt he had lost. As the weeks went by, Carlos began to see the world with new eyes. He realized that success wasn't just about business or the wealth he had accumulated, but also about the ability to love, connect, and live fully. He understood that he needed to take care of himself and his son, who was feeling lost amidst all the changes. Marcos, in turn, noticed the transformation in his father. Their relationship began to strengthen again, and the teenager felt relieved to see that Carlos was more open and willing to discuss his feelings. The conversations that had once been tense were now lighter, and Marcos began to see his father as a man who was allowing himself to start over, even if it meant facing his flaws and fears. The revelation Carlos had on the beach became a milestone in his journey of overcoming. He understood that life is made of ups and downs, and that true strength comes from getting back up after falling. This new perspective not only changed his relationship with the past but also prepared him for the challenges that lay ahead. Carlos was finally ready to face his weaknesses, open his heart, and seek the happiness he so desperately desired. Carlos began to feel the effects of the transformation he experienced at the beach. That day, marked by the laughter of children and the building of the sandcastle, had become a symbol of hope. Now, when he woke up each morning, he made it a point to look in the mirror and recognize not only his flaws but also his potential. He genuinely wanted to live more fully. However, the journey would not be easy. The first challenge arose when Carlos decided to restructure his routine. He began waking up earlier to exercise on the beach, something he had never done before. At first, his body protested. He felt pain in his legs, and fatigue accumulated quickly. But at the same time, there was a sense of renewal. Each run on the sand became a small triumph, and Carlos felt he was reconnecting with life. He remembered the children who laughed and played, and that motivated him to keep going. Meanwhile, his relationship with Mariana deepened. They started exploring new hobbies together, such as cooking and hiking local trails. During one of these hikes, in a moment of tranquility, Carlos opened up about his past. He talked about the betrayals that had marked him and how it had caused him to build walls around himself. Mariana, listening attentively, encouraged him not to be dominated by fear. She said he couldn't live in the past. The future was where he should focus. These words echoed in his mind, and the certainty that he could overcome his insecurities began to take root. However, not everything was that simple. The tension with Richard still lingered in the air. The brother, who had always been a burden in his life, seemed unable to understand Carlos's new stance. During a work meeting, Richard made a sarcastic remark about his brother's new approach, insinuating that he was becoming weak. Carlos felt irritation rise within him but decided not to let himself be provoked. Instead of confronting Richard, he took a deep breath and responded calmly. He expressed that he was simply seeking a healthier path for all of them, trying to maintain his composure. Richard was taken aback by this response, having not anticipated such a reaction. Carlos realized that by standing firm, he was actually strengthening himself. Interactions with Marcos, his son, were also changing. The teenager, who had always been somewhat distant, began to open up more. During dinner, Carlos noticed that Marcos had a lot to say about his own insecurities. Carlos seized the opportunity to share his experiences, creating a safe space for his son to express himself. He reassured Marcos that he need not fear failure, explaining that everyone faces difficulties and that the important thing is to learn from them. This conversation brought relief to both of them, and a mutual understanding began to blossom. However, life had its own plans, and new challenges emerged each day. One of the biggest obstacles was the financial pressure that was mounting. The resort, which had once seemed a promising project, was now facing difficulties due to increasing competition and a lack of adequate investments. Carlos found himself at a crossroads, feeling the weight of responsibilities threatening his new emotional state. He knew he needed to act, but anxiety began to seep into his thoughts. Carlos decided he wouldn't face this alone. He began gathering his team to discuss new strategies and ideas. During one of these meetings, he realized that many of the employees were just as worried as he was. Rather than letting the situation get him down, Carlos encouraged them to think outside the box. He emphasized the importance of unity and creativity, stating that together they were stronger. The atmosphere of collaboration brought new energy to the team, and Carlos felt more confident. Despite the difficulties, he continued to seek support from Mariana and his group of friends. One night, while discussing professional challenges, Mariana placed her hand on his arm and reminded him that he was not alone and that she would always be by his side. Her words comforted him and reaffirmed his determination not to give up. He realized that even when life felt like a maze, there were people willing to help him find the way out. Carlos was learning to cope with his new challenges, both emotional and physical. He understood that the journey of self-discovery and overcoming obstacles would be long and filled with ups and downs. However, with each passing day, he felt stronger and more capable of facing whatever lay ahead. The resilience he had learned from the children at the beach accompanied him, and he was determined to rebuild his sandcastle, one grain at a time. Carlos had embarked on a journey of transformation, and with each step, he faced both internal and external challenges that tested his determination. He looked in the mirror not just to see physical changes but to recognize the new essence beginning to form within him. Confidence, once a distant shadow, was now becoming a constant companion during his morning runs on the beach, where he felt the sand beneath his feet and the sun rising on the horizon. At first, the pains were intense. Each run revealed the fragility of his body, protesting against the effort. But gradually, he began to accept these limitations, understanding that growth often came with discomfort. That pain was not a sign of weakness but of transformation. He remembered the children building sandcastles, always starting over after each wave washed them away. Inspired by this simplicity, Carlos decided that he too could rise again, one grain of sand at a time. His relationship with Mariana was blossoming, and together they explored new possibilities. The kitchen became a space for laughter and experimentation, where mistakes were merely opportunities for learning. During a walk, Carlos found the courage to open his heart about his past traumas. He shared the wounds that had caused him to build walls around himself. Mariana, with empathy, encouraged him to leave the past behind, emphasizing that the future was where his focus should be. Her words settled in his mind as a mantra of hope. However, Richard's presence served as a constant reminder of the insecurities Carlos faced. During a work meeting, Richard made a harsh joke about Carlos's new approach, implying that he was becoming a fragile man. Instead of reacting with anger, Carlos took a deep breath and responded firmly, reiterating that he was simply seeking a healthier path for everyone. His calm and measured response surprised Richard and left Carlos with a sense of empowerment. He realized that true strength lay not in confrontation but in remaining true to oneself. Interactions with Marcos were also evolving. The teenager, who often seemed lost in his own world, began to open up during conversations. At dinner, Carlos felt he could share his own insecurities without fear of judgment. He reassured Marcos that he didn't need to fear failure, emphasizing that everyone faces challenges and that the crucial part is to learn from them. The father's sincerity not only brought them closer but also lightened the relationship, allowing both to breathe more easily. Nevertheless, life continued to present obstacles. The resort, once a symbol of dreams, was facing a financial crisis. The pressure was mounting, and Carlos felt the weight of responsibility nearly suffocating. He could have easily succumbed to despair, but instead, he decided he wouldn't face this alone. He invited his team to discuss the difficulties they were facing, and together, they began to outline new strategies. During these meetings, Carlos realized that collaboration was generating a renewed sense of hope. He encouraged his team, stating that together they could find creative solutions. This new approach not only revitalized the work environment but also strengthened Carlos's confidence in his own leadership abilities. Conversations with Mariana and his friends also became a safe haven. One night, while they discussed professional challenges, Mariana held his arm and reminded him that he was not alone and that she would always be at his side. Her words brought him deep comfort, reaffirming his determination not to give up. He recognized that even in difficult times, he had a support circle around him, ready to help him weather any storm. Throughout this journey, Carlos learned valuable lessons. Success was no longer solely tied to material wealth, but to the richness of experiences and relationships he cultivated. He began to view life from a new perspective, where each challenge represented an opportunity for growth, and each mistake, a step toward learning. Wisdom emerged as a guiding light, illuminating his path and changing his worldview. Carlos was transforming, and with this transformation, he began to apply the lessons he had learned. Each day, he felt stronger, more confident, and more capable of facing adversities. The resilience he cultivated by observing the children on the beach accompanied him, and he was determined to rebuild his sandcastle, one grain at a time, with the certainty that he could overcome any challenge life presented. Carlos was at a decisive moment. The resort, which once symbolized his dreams, was facing a crisis that could crumble everything he had built. Meetings had become more frequent, and the tension in the air was palpable. He looked at his team, composed of people he respected, who were also feeling the weight of the pressure. The responsibility of leading them weighed on his shoulders. But instead of allowing despair to consume him, he decided it was time to act. On a sunny morning, Carlos called everyone for a meeting in the open space of the resort. He knew it was time to unite forces and face the challenge head-on. The sea breeze brought a slight coolness that contrasted with the nervousness he felt inside. When everyone gathered, he took a deep breath, trying to channel the confidence he had cultivated throughout his journey. "I know the situation is difficult," Carlos began, his voice firm yet gentle. "We are facing a critical moment, but we are not alone. We have each other, and together we can find a solution." He looked into the eyes of each team member, sensing the mix of anxiety and hope. "Let's share ideas. Let's support each other. I want to hear from you." Ideas began to flow, and as each person shared their suggestions, Carlos felt stronger. He was at the center of a support circle, an environment where everyone felt free to contribute. A colleague's proposal brought new energy. "What if we hold a promotional event to attract new clients? Something that highlights what makes our resort unique." The idea resonated in the room and quickly transformed into an action plan. Carlos felt a spark of hope ignite within him. He realized that, contrary to what he thought, he didn't have to carry all the weight alone. It was a truth he had learned during his journey. Strength was not just in being the leader, but in knowing how to listen and unite people. The team worked hard in preparation for the event. Carlos remembered the conversations he had with Mariana and Marcos, and how opening his heart had strengthened their bonds. He applied that same philosophy of vulnerability when working with his team, allowing them to share their concerns and challenges as well. This not only united them but also transformed the work atmosphere. Finally, the day of the event arrived. The resort was decorated, and the sun shone brightly, creating a welcoming environment. Carlos was nervous, but determination drove him. He remembered Mariana's words, "The future is where you should focus." With that in mind, he prepared to welcome the guests. As people began to arrive, the energy in the air was contagious. The event was a success, exceeding all expectations. People had fun, and the team worked in harmony, showcasing what made the resort a special place. Carlos saw smiles on his colleagues' faces and felt joy in his heart. He realized that true success was not just in the numbers or profit, but in the connection he had created with his team and the guests. At the end of the day, as everyone gathered to celebrate, Carlos felt a wave of gratitude. He knew he had overcome a great challenge, but more importantly, he had learned the importance of being present and vulnerable. He raised a glass in a toast, and the entire room fell silent. "I thank all of you. Today, we not only saved our resort, but we also united as a family. I learned that true strength comes from being together. Let's continue to grow and support each other, always." Applause and shouts of joy echoed through the space, and Carlos felt that he was finally on the right path. He had restarted not just in his professional life, but also in his personal life. The journey of transformation had no end, but he was more prepared than ever to face whatever came next, knowing he could always count on the support of those he loved and respected. And so, amidst the celebration, Carlos smiled, knowing he had found his inner strength, and that each challenge faced had shaped him, bringing him back to the light, where hope and friendship intertwined like the waves of the sea. After the event, the atmosphere at the resort was transformed. Carlos walked through the hallways, feeling the positive vibe that now permeated the environment. The faces of his colleagues were illuminated by smiles, and pride radiated from each of them. He knew the crisis was not completely resolved, but it was a significant step for everyone. In the following days, the team continued to work together, propelled by the success of the event. New ideas emerged, and each member felt more comfortable expressing their opinions. Carlos noticed that the vulnerability he had shared had created a ripple effect. People felt more connected, more willing to collaborate, and this was reflected in the quality of the work they were producing. On a quiet afternoon, while watching the sunset on the beach next to the resort, Carlos found Mariana. She approached him with a look of satisfaction. "The event was incredible, wasn't it?" she asked, sitting down beside him. "Yes, it was. I didn't expect the team to come together so much," Carlos replied, looking at the horizon. "I feel like we learned something valuable. It's not just about business, it's about the people." Mariana smiled. "You led in a way that inspired all of us. You showed that it is possible to be strong and vulnerable at the same time." He nodded, thoughtful. "It was an important lesson. I used to think I needed to have all the answers, but I realized that true power lies in listening and bringing people together around us." That night, Carlos decided to gather the team for an informal conversation. He wanted to know how everyone felt after the event and what they could do to continue moving forward. As he entered the meeting room, he saw animated faces and a palpable energy. "I want everyone to know how proud I am of you," Carlos began, his voice full of emotion. "What we did together was more than just an event. It was a demonstration of what we are capable of when we work as a team. And this cannot stop here." One of the employees, Lucas, raised his hand and spoke. "Carlos, you truly made us feel part of this. Before, it was easy to feel lost, but now we have a purpose. We can do more events like this, not just to promote the resort, but to connect even more with the community." The idea was met with enthusiasm, and soon everyone began discussing new strategies and initiatives. Carlos realized that by making space for his team's voices to be heard, he had created an environment that encouraged creativity and collaboration. However, not everything was perfect. Carlos knew that financial pressure was still a concern. The bills kept coming, and the challenges in the tourism sector persisted. He decided it was time to address these issues transparently. In a meeting with the whole team, he said, "We still have a long way to go. The financial situation is not easy, but I believe that if we maintain the same energy and unity we showed at the event, we can overcome this. We need to be creative and find new ways to attract customers." There was a momentary silence, but soon heads began nodding in agreement. One of the team members, Anna, proposed an idea about promotional packages. Others followed with suggestions about partnerships with local businesses. Carlos felt a wave of hope. They were willing to fight, and that was all he needed. As the weeks went by, the resort began to recover. New customers arrived, and reservations increased. More importantly, the team was more united than ever. They supported each other, celebrated successes, and learned from mistakes. Carlos realized he had created a space where everyone felt valued and part of something greater. As he walked along the beach at sunset, Carlos reflected on the journey. He had faced losses and uncertainties, but he had also found strength in vulnerability and mutual support. He understood that leadership was not just about making tough decisions, but about building relationships and cultivating an environment of trust. Looking at the horizon, Carlos smiled. He was ready for whatever came next, knowing that regardless of the challenges, he had a team that was more than just colleagues. They were a true family. And that was the greatest achievement of all. Carlos's journey at the resort was not just about saving a business. It was a profound transformation in his life and the lives of his team. After the event that united everyone, he realized that true leadership was not about having answers or making tough decisions alone, but about creating an environment where everyone felt heard and valued. This shift in perspective not only strengthened the team's spirit but also brought new light to the challenges they faced. As the days went by, Carlos saw growth not only in the resort's bookings but also in the relationships among the team members. The connection they had formed was reflected in their daily actions. They supported each other, celebrated every small victory, and learned from mistakes, aware that they were all in this journey together. Carlos realized that this new dynamic was the solid foundation they all needed to face future challenges. On a sunny day, while organizing a new event for the community, Carlos felt a wave of gratitude. He looked around and saw his colleagues laughing, working together with enthusiasm. The transformation he had envisioned was not just a dream, it was a tangible reality. He remembered the difficulties he had faced and how the vulnerability he had shared had opened doors for collaboration and creativity. Carlos understood that true success was not measured solely in numbers or profits, but in the ability to inspire and unite people. He knew that even with the financial pressure still present, the team had become stronger and more resilient. They had learned to work together, to listen to one another, and that was more valuable than any marketing strategy. The love for what they did and the dedication to the team were the pillars that sustained the resort. At the end of the day, as he returned home, Carlos reflected on his journey. He realized he had grown not only as a leader but as a person. The experience taught him that vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness, and that by allowing others to come close, he had created an unbreakable bond with his team. With a smile on his face, he understood that regardless of the challenges still to come, he was not alone. He had a true family by his side, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Carlos's story is a powerful reminder that true strength comes from unity and empathy. That every challenge can turn into an opportunity for growth and learning, and that leadership is, above all, about caring for people. If you have ever gone through a similar situation or have an inspiring story of overcoming challenges, share it in the comments. Your experience can impact others and foster a network of support and inspiration. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more content that touches the heart and transforms lives. Let's build a community where everyone feels valued and motivated to make a difference. It's time to take action and share your voice.